Hey everybody, working on the van today, and one thing I haven't talked about, I think, is my heater install. So this is just one of those regular Espar, one of the new S2 or D2L units, but what is unique is I've got it mounted outside the van. So besides quickly covering that, I'd like to just bring up a couple other install tips that I don't see many people talk about, but I think really help to make a nice and sleek install. So let's just quickly go over that. The most common place I see people installing Espar heaters is underneath the passenger seat here. And my big recommendation would be to try to install your heater anywhere in the van on the driver's side. The main reason for this is if you mount it here under the seat, you can kind of push the maximum exhaust tube length that Espar recommends and vent your heater out on this side, but it's right next to your driver's side door then. And I think these diesel heaters, they do burn fairly clean, but they do stink a bit, especially, it kind of seems like it varies van to van, but there's going to be some of that combusted diesel smell. And it just kind of sucks to have the exhaust pipes essentially coming up underneath your sliding door, which is probably how you're going to access your van most times camping. So by putting the heater here on the driver's side anywhere, you can essentially vent it out underneath some portion of this van, which means you're least likely to have to deal with that smell as you're camping. And I think that is a critical part of the install process. And if you haven't installed your heater underneath the passenger seat, you've also got enough room to run some more ducting. So I'd like to just quickly introduce you to what is a product actually made by Propex, and that is their acoustic ducting. You can see it's got kind of a woven look to it. It has a few disadvantages, main off, it's gonna increase cost. You can't install it outside because it absorbs water, and it doesn't do a very good job making tight bends. But what it does do is makes your heater incredibly quieter inside. Now, the keys to making this stuff work is you can watch some videos online of how much noise reduction it has, but it basically prevents the noise of the fan from the heater. The noise doesn't just bounce up this hard-walled tube and then out into your living space. This just really helps muffle it. I would say though, the keys to get the maximum effect, you want to have a length of that on both the intake and the return of the heater. And if you can get it to make some kind of slow bend to just make sure there's no way that you got any line of sight to the heater fan, I think this stuff does an incredible job. So anyways, I cannot recommend this enough, this acoustic ducting. Unfortunately, it's often back ordered in North America, but I'll put the link below for vancafe.com, who seems to be kind of the main distributor here in the States. All right, and actually right before we get under the van and actually look at my heater install underneath there, let me just quickly talk about some adapters you may be interested in if you decide to go with this acoustic ducting. Because what may happen is you may, like in this van, underneath the floor, I am using the standard kind of ducting that comes with the heater, but I want to transition then to this acoustic ducting inside. Anyways, this stuff is much better at making tight turns, so I would say there's a good chance you'll be using some of this to run your ducting, and then you'll end up transitioning to this, or vice versa. You'll need to use both types. So this is a Webasto part. It's a 60mm adapter. I do recommend hose clamps on both sides, but it essentially allows you to make a nice connection. That's the most sleek way to do this, even though these are, to cost a few extra bucks per connection. These are really nice. And then the other thing I like about is if you want to essentially make a really tight bend, you can buy their 90-degree adapters that snaps on. Then you've got a nice connection here. And so then this can also go to this side, and you can have the other kind of tubing coming into here. So anyways, that's just some nice kind of ducting adapters that is good to be aware of that they exist. And then the last thing I'll say about ducting is this is a Webasto kind of air duct outlet compared to the ones that you get with your Espar. I'm a big fan of these. They just, I think, look a little more sleek. In general, I feel like the spinning action on the Espar ones I felt can be pretty rough to the point where you're like, am I going to break this grill while trying to rotate this? And these are just nice. I'm not sure. It might depend on which heater you've bought, but I really like these Webasto parts, even though I prefer Espar heaters. So there you go. Now let's get under the van and actually look at the install underneath there. All right, so now we're under the van, and this is essentially where the heater is installed. It's just in this metal box. There's a couple different companies that sell this. I got mine from Butler Technic, but heatso.com also has a version of this box. And it's really just like installing the heater, but now you've just essentially, instead of running these two tubes through your floor, you're running your main ducting tubes through the floor, which does mean you've got to make some larger holes. As well, you can see there's my exhaust tube. It's coming out pretty close to my rear tire, which just helps kind of minimize that you're going to get any fumes or smells as you're going in and out of your sliding door, which I think is really handy. And now let me just point out a few things that I think help make this install easier. First, you need to cut some pretty big holes to run that 60mm ducting through. But if you see, I've got these rubber grommets, which is actually a part you can purchase on MacMaster. I think it does a really good job of firmly holding these ducting hoses in here, so there's no chance that they're going to essentially vibrate and maybe, cut a hole through the side of it as you've been driving your van around. So I think those grommets are really handy. All right, this duct as well, it looks a little different because I've got some insulation around it. I do like this ducting, but it doesn't do a great job making tight bends. So the little run over there, I couldn't actually get much insulation on, but that is something to consider about these external installations, is if you did have a really long run underneath here, you would be losing some heat through that. Then on the metal hose connection, I'm using the silicone elbow. This is actually a Propex part, but it just helps to keep my ground clearance unobstructed. So it's nice because you can't make that tight of bends with this metal exhaust tubing. And then over here, I've got the wiring connector. When it is time to service this unit, it is going to be a little bit more of a pain in the butt, but essentially you can remove these screws. That will help you pop that off. And then from the inside, you can pop these two ducts out with these hose clamps. You can pull these off, and then you can pull this wiring connector and just pull the whole unit out. So, when it is time to service this and it's covered in road grime and mud, it is going to definitely be more of a pain to service this than if it was mounted inside your cab. But I really think the pros of just saving the room inside your cab and essentially having this out of the way, exhausting, away from your sliding door is worth the trouble of that. All right, and if you are installing your heater on the driver's side, this has become one of my favorite places to mount my fuel pump. It's got the proper angle because you need it to be at a certain angle. And then this piece of metal here, essentially, it just makes a nice and convenient location. You just got to drill a little hole there, and you can just attach that rubber piece to it. So if you're looking for a place to attach your fuel pump, I think it's just very handy. There's the uptake tube from the factory. Then you can just attach your own fuel line. I like to leave a little extra. And it's just a nice, convenient location if you're looking for a place to attach your fuel pump. Anyways, I hope you found some of these little tips useful. There's quite a few videos out on the internet really going step by step through the heater install, but I just wanted to mention a few things I don't usually see people bring up. These new Espar heaters, they really are just nice and easy, plug and play. The old heaters, if you ever tried to install one of those where you essentially had to piece together your own wire harness, you had to splice in your own altitude kit, those were fun. But these new ones are really nice and easy. So anyways, thanks so much for watching, and I hope you found this useful.